All right, today we are diving deep into a really fascinating set of esoteric texts. Our goal here is to deconstruct a specific path, a kind of spiritual journey that's all about power, passion, and the nature of will itself. So let's get right into it. The whole philosophy we're exploring today really kicks off with this one simple but incredibly powerful idea. One is where manifestation begins. You can think of this as our starting point, our anchor. It's this idea that everything you want to create, every action you take, it all has to start from a single, unified point of will. From you. This is the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. So here's the game plan. The source material actually calls this a journey of the magician, and we're going to follow that exact structure. First, we'll look at the invocation. Who is being called upon? Then we'll dig into the philosophy behind it. After that, we'll break down the specific petitions for power, and finally, we'll see what the ultimate transformation at the end of this road is supposed to look like. Okay, first section, the call to King Asmodeus. See, before we can even get into the philosophy, we have to understand the central figure being addressed in these texts, and he's described as nothing less than a ruler of the material plane. So, who exactly is this King Asmodeus, according to the texts we're looking at? Well, they give us this incredibly specific and detailed picture. We're not just talking about some vague spirit. This is a king with a very clear domain, a list of responsibilities, and a unique set of skills. And this is what's so interesting. Look at his attributes. He's presented as a teacher of real-world, tangible skills, mathematics, handicrafts, things you can actually do. He's a ruler of the material world. And he wields passion, power, and lust, not as sins, but as fundamental forces of nature. This isn't some abstract, airy-fairy entity. This is a master of the physical, messy, tangible world. The texts also give a name to his home turf, so to speak, Galachab. Now, don't think of this as a spot on a map. It's described more as a conceptual space, almost like a dimension or a state of being that is the pure embodiment of the forces he controls, all that passion and power and even destruction. As you go through the source material, you see this phrase over and over and over again. It acts like a chant, a mantra. It's kind of the drumbeat of this entire process, grounding the person and acting as a bridge from one stage to the next, from just understanding an idea to actually putting it into practice. All right, on to part 2, and this is where things get really interesting, the philosophy of desire. This is the why behind the whole invocation. It's a worldview that takes a lot of common ideas about temptation, struggle, and willpower and just flips them right on their head. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Instead of seeing desire and temptation as things you need to resist, the texts argue that they are essential tools for your own liberation. The idea here is that by embracing your primal carnal nature, by getting drunk with indulgence, you actually unlock your own freedom and your ability to act. And it doesn't just stop with desire. This philosophy also champions adversity. Strife, struggle, even aggression. They're not seen as bad things. They're framed as necessary catalysts. It's the friction that creates the spark of action, forcing your will to actually do something in the real world. You know, growth doesn't happen when you're comfortable. It happens when you're challenged. Now, the source makes a really crucial distinction here about the kind of willpower you need. It basically splits stubbornness into 2 types. There's the kind that comes from ego and pride, which is seen as just a brittle obstacle you have to get past. And then there's the deep, unshakable stubbornness that comes from pure determination. One gets in your way, but the other is the engine that drives you forward. This simple line from the source is so important because it puts everything in context. This isn't about just blindly indulging every whim. It's framed as a conscious, difficult path, a journey of the magician that requires real wit, real courage, and a deep, honest understanding of yourself and the world around you. And there's our chant again. This time, it's signaling a shift. We're moving from just understanding the philosophy to actively applying it. We're going from the why to the what the texts call petitions for power. So, let's get down to brass tacks. What are the actual goals here? When people perform these petitions, what are they actually asking for? Well, the texts lay out a pretty clear and escalating series of desires. You can really group all the different petitions we find in the source material into 4 main categories. And what's fascinating is the progression. Notice how it starts with a totally internal goal, unifying yourself, And then it moves outward, toward influencing the material world, creating success, and finally, wielding some pretty serious destructive power. But the very first step, the first thing you have to ask for, is internal. The text actually calls achieving self-union a divine act. It's about being brutally honest with yourself, confronting your own flaws and struggles, symbolized by being naked, so you can become a single, unified being. This is the foundation that everything else has to be built on. So once that inner work is sought, the petitions move outward in a big way. They ask for material wealth, security, prosperity. Then they move on to success for your own projects, asking that any challenge can be overcome. And then, finally, they escalate to pure wrath, a direct call to shatter your obstacles and bring harsh punishment down on your enemies. It's the whole spectrum of human desire, really, from comfort to vengeance. And here it is, the chant, one last time. Think of this as our final gateway. It's moving us past the petitions themselves and into the ultimate goal, the final state of being that this whole journey promises. Which brings us to our final section, the ultimate transformation. Okay, so after the invocation, after embracing the philosophy, after making the petitions, what's the end game? What does it all lead to? Well, it's described as a state of total mastery, absolute satisfaction, and complete power over your own reality. To describe this final state, the text used these three really potent symbols to represent a soul satisfied. You have the ram, which is that initial, raw, destructive force that breaks down barriers. You have the bull, which stands for the courage and the legacy you build along the way. And finally, the devil, which symbolizes the profound wisdom you gain from the entire journey. All three together represent a state of blissful, powerful completion. This line from the texts, wow. This is probably the most powerful summary of the entire goal. It is the ultimate expression of power. The whole point of the journey is to cultivate a personal will that becomes an unstoppable force. A will so absolute that it can literally crumble any obstacle, no matter how permanent or immovable it seems. Your will becomes the deciding factor in any conflict. So here's the bottom line. What we're looking at isn't just a random collection of spells and chants. It's a structured psychological and spiritual system. It starts with invoking a specific kind of power, then adopting a philosophy that embraces the rawest parts of human nature, and then using that framework as a launchpad to achieve total mastery over yourself and your world. And that brings us to a final thought, a question I want to leave you with. This whole path is designed to forge a will that is absolute, a force that is unstoppable. And it really makes you wonder, what is the true nature, and maybe, what is the true cost of achieving that kind of power?